problems cannot understand outside global economy, achieve policy, despite of global centers, comes when agenda ignore reality, stringent policy hardly means that colonization will be less of reality, hyper-colonization, structural illusion, cultural figures, state activity, violence, citizenry, following authoritarian religious state, becoming the embodiment of universal truth, direction, and civil society, and that leads to extinction, small, luckily safe, a new century of defense challenges that require collective action, coming to global warning, complete natural research environments, and cooperation with no costs require cooperation, also delivery. We no longer suffer disease after the time lives, our own existence, our existence depends upon our ability to adapt to this new paradigm, to envision coexistence, global vices, with our actions, breach, and part alike, the infrastructure environment of the church, ecosystem across the world. We are presenting the opportunity to change our current course, benefit of nature, these cooperations, direct solidarity, and also the course of human event, so traditional principles, community vision. We know that today's youth no longer see politics affecting, tool for affecting social change, and I can flash you these cards after. Yeah, no, hold on. Our truth claims are true. The H1 consensus means it's possible to think about the word perfect truth. There may be no absolute truth. There is sufficient consensus for the conversation. We again useful understanding about things we need to know. And the beats points, the empirics allow us to navigate even though the absolute should went 2K. The value epistemology or I is considered less what matters more. And thus, since we clearly do not know, and then how it very now floating picks our voting issue. First is that excuse to AC because they critique and transform the blog, which means that which is uniquely bad because the one debate is structured around the 2AC. It also means that we cannot predict any other arguments they're going to make. And now the answer. Cross-apply all the framework and the ontology arguments are made on the security create addition permutation both and permutation to the plan the alternative every other instance. Now anthroprojection set focus is good. The alternative is environmental inaction. Man's 9 and liberty anthroprojection here thus yields an answer to the environment is considered only way to block the two unwelcome conclude how we always react to proper set anthroprojection thinking must be limited way to predict environment deal ecology all should believe that taking the planetary production is key to the following environment ethics the problems taken with the planetary preserve as one of massive environmental damage within the next 3 centuries can be written off as justice blinking the screen to save refugees here and as more relevant to one is guilty of temporal parochialism. Now the alternative destroys cultural diversity. Same matter for cultural prejudice admitted with the right thing about carrying political implemented vulnerable elitists regarding many Aboriginal people that admitted their life was completely animal rights can believe it. Non-fatal and independent societies of Latin America, the defendant small scale animal husbandry, these are matters of sustainability, survival, forcing such activity, tantamount to eliminate such a society, indigenous community engagement, local impact, animal hunting, having capacity to vilify the Macawanda with humane animal activity, alleged refuge, stereotype, animals, abolish, and colonial domination, these to animal rights, sentiment has served as entry point of right position now. That was distinction, saving him 90 cultures, diversity, universal research, diversity, the world of biological gene pool, people looking at nutrition course for answers called food research, food production, environment, management, social, the collective rights of the indigenous people to be separated, marked for separate now.
I'm sorry, real quick. What was the last argument you just made?
The cultural diversity.
And did you get to the extinction part?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, you're good. Yeah, you got time. I have a okay. Why is the state good?
Why is the state good?
Yeah, why is he using the state as an actor for this?
Are you talking about just in general or like this with the Boggs evidence?
Yeah, I'm just curious.
Okay, well I think the Boggs evidence, the small Buckley evidence answers that it's the idea of collective action, that an idea that we have things like linkage institutions, which means that if we have political opinions or voices.
What's the difference between biopolitics and biopower?
How do you want?
And it seems to be the distinction your evidence is making.
But which evidence are you talking about?
You make this claim in you make this claim that you're we're not biopower.
Oh yeah. Your evidence is talking about how the government can use internet restrictions to control the populations. The plan is not that. The plan is completely unrestricted internet access.
Wait, but doesn't Castro control it stuff?
No, that's status quo restrictions. The plan solves that. I think there's a very big difference to make because status quo.
No, our card is contextual to the fact if internet connections is what we the state uses to decide who can live and who can die.
Hold on, I think this answers our argument. Our Picon evidence says that status quo ICT regulation policies means that we give Cuba the minimum ICT regulations. However, we don't know what the word minimum means or adequate, which means the plan opens up restricted internet access and gives it to citizens. Gives citizens internet communications and other things phones.
So we give them the bare minimum?
No. That's status quo. We give them unrestricted ICT.
Okay, so why is unrestricted something that's not the exact same thing of making this sort of decision?
Well, restricted internet and censored internet would definitely be a form of biopolitics. Unrestricted internet, which means that at least the people, are able to kind of learn more about how the government functions, kind of give a starting point for them to kind of go against the Castro regime.
Oh, okay. let's go to these arguments you make about how, you know, Castro's going to say yes because he obviously wants things like internet democracy, but why in the case of Castro, what does your evidence indicate in the 1AC about how the regime's going to collapse? It's not a question of that. Like, I'm curious about this answer to, like, say no.
Okay. First is that your warrant to say no is that there's unrestricted, like the unrestricted access is bad. However, this evidence is actually before the, okay, here's how the ICT worked. In like 2011, I believe, there was a little bit of ICT restrictions removed, you know, giving adequate, quote unquote, adequate and a minimal ICT. That's when, that your evidence in the context of that Castro will say no. It's before those regulations were lifted. And the warrant as to why Castro would say no is because the internet is restricted. The plan would give unrestricted regulations, which means that the reason why Castro would say no in your card is the reason why he would say yes to the plan.
Okay, what does China win? What does China, okay, never mind.
One sec, let me start the timer. Starting prep. Step prep, 4:15 left. pan than anthro.
Anther required John 5?
Yeah. Or no, wait, no. That's not. It should be called speech round 5 to the search state modifier. Alright, you open it. Alright.
Hold on.
Alright, we're good. Okay. Everybody good? Kick the critique we're not going for, but I'll answer the framework arguments here. They say that the affirmative wanting their imagination of engagement with Latin America is good. Well, we're going to say it's bad, so it doesn't matter. They say ethics shouldn't come first, but this card says that scrutiny is important in engagement, and we are an important scrutiny of your affirmative, and I'll answer that later. They say threats are real, but this card is talking about challenging democracy. That's an important argument. I want you to start. They view anything as a threat to democracy as something that's inherently a threat. That's an important argument in context of the anthem debate. They say we see the political, but I'll answer that in a second. They say floating picks are bad, but we read it in the 1 and C, and we're not going to float a pick, so it doesn't matter. Answer. On the framework debate, the role of the ballot is to use the debate science as space for post, is to practice post-community as an operative displacement of anthropocentrism inherent in the 1 and C. That's Damascus 10. Scars are connected with problems relating to control of life and death of humans on the hand of predicting. Not the problem, the survival ground is not any means, not unquestionable absolute. Earth could survive just fine without humans. The challenge is to place the policy creatures in the context of the emerging paradigm of non-interpretation technology. Post-humanist displays from our interpretive framework, displays the human subject from the center of studies, and the reasons for versus ground critiques are a core part of negative ground that turns all their arguments about discussion segments predictable limits. Critiques are predictable. They over-limit our option, making it possible to be negative because we're forced to just go for China. We're good at around. Third is critiques are getting negative flexibility for its education. They limit out Christians of discourse of philosophy. The 1 and C proves why that type of education is good, and C, their policy first framework is leaning on fire. They try to justify their interpretation in order to do some sort of good for the species, extend caution, ordinate 1 and C. That's the sort of good life they try to protect from crisis, subordination of all, and genocide of all forms of life deemed politically not qualified. It means the 1 and C is they did that to their interpretation, and they 60 the political benign. You can turn the political argument C, the only radical form of politics, and regain it from transnational companies and political technopods. Best in 6. We live in a friends in era, social and ecological crisis. Transnational corporations are pillaging the planet, profitable imperatives through the exploitation against the minded, less optimism of technopods and knowledge, skeptics and places. You have the public, we far from the premise that there is a global environmental crisis, which is the most urgent issue facing us today. If humanity does not want to address ecological problems immediately with radical measures, the whole world those consequences will play out. We are losing rap battle in the preserved species ecosystem. Wilderness calls for moderation, compromise, and so Mars is the institution to be seen as treacherous and not a we must eliminate false hopes and blindness with the realities. The current system is inherently attractive bigamy. It cannot be reformed. It must be transcended through revolution at all levels. And radical and environmental movements are more effective at creating change than legislative reforms. That answers all their arguments about how we all their framework arguments about how we don't actually engage in political work. That's 6. Politics don't usually won't cut or we will lose the play with the rules of defense of the other cries in immediate and decisive radical movements and new revolutionary politics will live on the achievements of democratic traditions. Radical politics must be reversed with the growing power of the states and mass media and corporations. It must dismantle all asymmetrical power relations structures, hierarchy, and the human number of animals and the earth. Radical politics is impossible without education, communication, culture, and that art of anger, awaken, inspire, empower people to their action, inspire. They say, under this card, I quote, rational choice theory may provide the best account available to us. This is the reason why if our analysis proves why your rational decision-making avoids a certain lens of discussion, then you vote negative. And on the K proper. Arguing that we should be willing to risk the fate of human extinction because the affirmative defense of survival requires the species paradigm of political involvement, which would infinitely reproduce genocide of its own and communicable populations deem not fit for their notions of good life worth preserving. That's 1 and C caution nor damage. They have flat conceded that we should affirm all inhuman animals as equal to humans. All affirmative impact and permutation calculus that doesn't have an external ethical defense of its preference for the human survival kingdoms. All other forms of domination and exploitation can be discarded because presumed the human evaluation of extinction and survival prefer. Our background in this book is enables impossible ethical shifting and thinking relations towards being the conceded the link debate, which indicates that your notions of scientific development and a war against China and other threat constructions ignore the fact that our ability to test and develop disease cures are always perfected on the inhuman, i.e. the fact that we test animals in labs to develop our vaccines. The idea that you just expand it to solve these zoonotic diseases, ignore the fact that those diseases are being spread against the inhuman in the number of millions every single year, and 10 billion animals die every single year, but the call to action only matters in case the human is inflicted with this decision making, with this calculus. And on the analysis, on the calculus, how you should do this background. A is probability. B, I can see that the existence of human survival creates inevitable systematic suffering of all excluded populations that are deemed not qualified. That's the Caution arguments and turns all the arguments about access, because the ability to inferiorize certain populations means that the ability to view the Cuban people as not something we have to expand ICT to will be inevitable, because we view them as an inferior population. Even if the affirmative solves a proximate cause, they don't solve the overreaching of forms of domination. Allow that to occur. B is magnitude, or our impact is infinite summation of all the forms of life, life to suffering. This outweighs even the worst extinction level violence, because its fundamental unethical orientation towards life makes the destruction of the inhuman inevitable. They might win a marginal time frame argument, but the infinite subordination outweighs. And there's no intrinsic value to the affirmative. At root, the desirability of the affirmative comes from the resolution for potential mass suffering death. Our argument supports the efficacy of the plan to achieve the goal, because the entire project of human survival is built on endless domination and imposition of survival of all other forms of life, meaning in the short term they prevent suffering and death of nuclear conflict in the name of cyber conflict in the name of preserving species which practices endless domination and suffering around the world. And they say permutation do both, or they say again they can see the ethics debate, so you should view all animals as equal. Scientific knowledge is manipulated to make destruction of the inhuman inevitable. On the permutation debate, the permutation suffers one sees impact claims, as well as the multiple pieces of one evidence isolated above, which is show a large preference of the survival of the human good life, regardless of the impact of the non-human animals. This makes the affirmative movement target showing negative ground on questions breached by the one making it possible even negative vote of fairness and education. And permutation links more strict criticism towards politics that excludes very life in the name of the voice of the politically qualified citizen, that turns all their arguments about cultural diversity, because it's a question of for who that's tested and for. Sovereignty provides both political life and the life, property decision in the bare life. The citizenship names new sense of life, the work on the ground sovereignty, and identifies members of the sovereign. This makes the link between which is proper the nation, the citizen, and the determinant of the zone of the state of life. Those who do not fill the role of citizen are no longer guaranteed the protection, participation, political life, which corresponds to the position of animals in human society. They have always this state of exception is which founds political and permutation links more holding out for reform, or holding out for the desire for the human to reform the inhuman animal, i.e. just like getting rid of factory farms isn't correct politics. We should have a revolution in our scholarship. And the permutation is impossible in order to achieve species being. We must first challenge the idea of a life community that requires completely rejecting the notion of species level politics. That's one see. That's one see. Evidence that means that only solving permutation would be the time frame permutation, which is illegitimate and would be a voting issue anyway. And they only made a non-mutually exclusive one. And there's no right to permutation. The alternative test the desirability of the human-centered survival paradigm. The affirmative has sufficient ground to defend that concept, not merely mooted off of us. They say non-mutually exclusive parts, but there are no mutually exclusive parts. The entire one is mutually exclusive. Their call to action is built upon domination, and they say and the alternative is to reject the human survival ethic in order to embrace species being, which is deprivation of key features to humanity, given that the plain text is motivated by the preservation of good human life, proven the one is the link analysis done about that means there's no particular time that would be mutually exclusive with plan in any of them, that or whatever, which makes it impossible to be negative. On the alternative to evade the paradigm of human survival entails. Okay, wait, real quick. They say we don't need to enact an answer that seems political. They make a bunch of arguments about how we destroy cultural diversity, but this is just straight up stupid. The idea that we should just deny that the idea that we should just stop having an unending genocide against all inhuman animals as a form of destroying culture is asinine. We're not saying that other populations can't eat animals. Our argument is that the unending subordination of those animals in unnatural forms of politics in which we deny them their sovereignty and autonomy is a bad form of engagement. The one entity is an impact turn to that notion of rationale, and it's also an extra link, so I don't even have to win one to the affirmative. And the paradigm of human survival entails the notion of good life, which is the negation of all the good life. With that, the negation of all good life is the unqualified, bare, and communicable life. Political subjectivity is the effect of the survival paradigm the alternative rejects. And this abandonment towards survival ethic, this abandonment of the human survival ethic enables a transformative rethinking outside of the species, only total abandonment of privileged species. Notion of human survival can we reach and understand the species being managed until radical direction, political and ethical framework which built upon the fundamental exclusion and incommunicable forms of the human. So even if they extend a bunch of shit on framework about education, the argument is that we create an ethical, like, we're an impact turn to that line of thought, and we solve best by creating new forms of politics. And the negative is an act of assuming a treacherous identity, the dynamics of different forms of privilege posits us in positions of both the oppressor and the oppressed. In the species war, we are the human oppressors, complicit with the cycle of torturous violence. The only feasible solution is to work against the structure of our own culture. And this does not mean that we deny our identity to reclaim unity with the oppressed, but it does mean that we adopt an ethic that attempts to minimize our own domination against the human animals. They also make an argument about playing fix on the play. Cross six.
Okay, your best evidence, which talks about how the political is already seated and like the alternative can solve, talks about it talks about things like eco crisis, but then it also goes to say the reason why the politics is already seated goes on. It's rooted in corporate power and the erosion of democracy. How does the alternative solve?
Well, yeah, the corporate power and erosion of democracy justified by anthropocentric domination of the inhuman animal.
Your evidence makes a distinction. It does not say ecological crisis from erosion of democracy. It says and democracy. How are those two related?
Okay, just to like explain this for you, I mean the article's titled Revolutionary Environmentalism. It's talking explicitly about how anthropocentric domination allows corporations to be seen as autonomous entities.
Which piece of evidence is that?
All of our best evidence. It's all of like the ecological crisis might be like we might see amalgamation in things like corporations, but that's only an example of a larger anthropocentric system. Best would agree with our root cause analysis, which you haven't made.
Okay.
So
actually, I want to talk about that other piece of best evidence that you're talking about. It said we must, or not your best evidence, but one of your pieces of evidence that says that it must dismantle all asymmetrical power relations, things that include, it says humans over animals, then it goes on to say things like education, communication, culture, art.
yeah, that doesn't mean we're not allowed to talk and paint. Like,
okay, how does the alternative, which is to like, embrace animal and human equality, solve things like education, communication, culture, and art? Because your evidence outlines those are part of the things that are asymmetrical power relations.
Alternative rejection of the species or rejection of the human body in favor of the species being allows us to assume the justifications for things like art and science and rationale and communication to dominate other animals. And using that treacherous identity, being seen as a terrorist to ourselves, is uniquely productive at recognizing those dominations.
Okay, I want to ask, I want to talk about the link level here. Yeah. We don't test on animals. Our element evidence says that the reason why the plants law is because the United States provides supplies and Cuba has the doctors.
Okay, I don't like, the link
analysis. Actually, we would help.
Well, the link analysis has to do with one, you trying to stop an extinction. Two, you're trying to stop a war, or win a war, I should say. And third, the notions of science, i.e. we can develop vaccines or expand biomedical facilities to Cuba, ignores the fact that the reasons for those biomedical facilities, i.e. Developing things like vaccines, allow for things like millions of animals to be infected with deadly diseases.
Here's my thing though. We don't.
You're permanently taking consideration of that. I know the plan isn't like we should test on animals, but you still allow for the expansion of those biomedical factories, which do. The point.
No, you just give them supplies. Those facilities are already there. How does shipping them supplies?
Yeah, you make it easier for them to kill a bunch of animals. You should save it.
Huh?
You just need to save it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I gave them one. Oh, here's theirs. Or, well, that worked. Not even right-handed.
Okay, it's gonna be the case in the order of say no, China, and then this state argument.
Huh? What are the flows, bro?
The case law.
Yeah, there are like 3 different ones.
Yeah.
Which ones are you going to?
It's good. Say no.
Or that's
say
not
no.
a flow.
Solvency.
Say no is not a flow.
Solvency.
There you
Solvency,
go.
whatever. Yeah. Solvency, then China, and then this state argument.
On which flow?
You mean
The- What?
Where did you
Yeah,
put
the
the-
healthcare flow. You taught me
yeah.
the healthcare. Yeah.
Yeah, alright.
Sorry. No, you're good.
Is it on his blue flash drive?
I'm sitting there right now.
Oh, okay.
You got a timer, Jacob?
Yeah.
We never know exactly.
only argument to our state no evidence that it's talking about the internet and the Florida claim you're going to extend across our identity and her own kind of talks. It's not just about the current internet. It's talking about how Castro has a regime and he wants to give it a help for a reason. He will reject any sort of internet commerce with other countries. And Cuba says no, hates the U.S. agenda. Latin America is economically structured against American engagement means they don't use internet effectively, and even if they do, it's restricted by Castro. This is 2006. Believing new left president of the Cuban and reject the U.S. backers rated that regional commerce and registration in Cuba that we find unconditional solidarity the fact that contained the left rhetoric and involves in the economic distribution between the issues of dealing with anti-U.S. government of Cuba and Venezuela and the right framework for the least of Washington's effort in free trade in Latin America. And Cuba has and will continue to avoid foreign partnership. This is a meta-uniqueness claim on all of their internet claims in Speenberg in 2012. Government officials say that foreign partners will make advantage of Cuban funds and private innovation in Cuba prefer to seek to take commercial deals with developing countries. It means they don't solve any of their claims talking about how it is just about the internet, about how the authoritarian government will want to solve restriction. This is the only argument they make on this flow. This is a very important distinction. They will say no to any other foreign partnership. They take our evidence out of context. Cuba is anti-American. They won't consider oppositional figures. It's Heaven and 12. The U.S. interest sex and Havana does not regularly refer to the free course of the internet of Cubans who want to sign up. Cuba's accused diplomatic mission of road Cuba considers all efficient figures to be stages of the Washington cause. The trouble Cuba is charged with using the diplomatic facility and indoctrinating the opposition tried to trend Cuba's interests. Great, go to China. Extend our Argus evidence. War with China is inevitable because we have a zero-sum relationship without them and their emerging economic pits against the contrast to Cuba because eating up the resource the U.S. requires by 2027 they'll become unacceptable threat. This is an important distinction in our claim. Our evidence makes a predictive claim about the future. The Pentagon indicates that things like these will happen. This will be an important distinction in a second. But extend our lever evidence talks about status quo China war means that we instantly win now. But now is key because of no reality. There's a retaliation. China missile would have a 99% chance of hitting a nuclear silo with China and has a 5% chance of retaliation. You weigh this against the probability of their war scenario. China's DF-220 ballistic millions wars now is key safe. Naval power projection in the Pacific is K on 11. Even performing the version of the 2011, we likely deploy the ways no way. If one is safe, the aircraft carrier to fire to reject the aircraft carrier would be taking off landing conditions. Fire the aircraft carrier symbolizes U.S. power projecting capabilities of deterrence. The only uniqueness claim they make on this argument is that there's no retaliation. That their evidence is preferable because it's 2013 and talk about because they would attack things like healthcare. But our evidence is contextual. The fact that it is about a form of relationship where there will be multiple scenarios of conflict. Military superiority. U.S. nuclear weapons are now so regular they can conduct a successful counterforce to attack these. We would dominate over China. Now is key because China is developing new weapons to counter us in the United States like J-20 and ballistic missiles. That evidence I just read and delay is infinitely worse because there's no adaptable Navy and Air Force means that we will win now. This gates in 2009. China's modernizing the armed forces of the areas of greatest concern of the growth capabilities of cyber anti-satellite warfare and the air defense, anti-ship weaponry, submarine, and ballistic missile modernization of these could threaten America's primary list of projected power in the U.S. under combative power in the Air Force with combatively the defense diversity, whether the President of the Korean Peninsula, Taiwan War, and their only answer is pretty terrible extension of the 1AC. They talk about how it will turn into things like that, but our evidence is about an attitude, and our evidence takes the predictive claim about the Pentagon talking about a manifest SE mindset and economic competition caused the crown off. Their 1AC evidence indicates this about China. If they lose this claim, and they're going to go for this claim they make in the 2AC, it's pretty terrible because they don't have an advantage. Also, they say 2013 there's still a relationship with superpower. They can't indict this claim and try to go for some impact defense on this position. There's no, and also go to this state argument. Their argument is that they don't support biopowder, but our argument is that the state is something that is racist. Our evidence indicates that biopolitics biopolitics causes the state to influence over people. They make a pretty bad argument about how it doesn't apply to their argument. But our evidence is about when you support the state, it only causes a biopolitical structure. They cause forms of racism. This is a priority issue. You have to reject racism. They don't answer this question right. Biopower, biopolitics is something different. We dominate over other states and make decisions for them, so that way we can do things like support racism against people like the Cubans. Also, go to disease. Where we have that. There's no impact of disease. They either burn or they don't spread. This is positive 5. Homo sapiens admitted there's 5 every disease, none of the clothes are destroying and answer our human race and non-selection in favor of the germs that identically and lead to adding because your genes are more likely to spread than the germs and most likely to duplicate and cut the card there. Their only argument is that it spreads fast. This is their only unique piece of evidence to extend some sort of impact. But our MIT evidence indicates that the death tolls are students, we will adapt, and their argument is just wrong. Our Max and 3 evidence indicates there was solely a U.S. attack will cause a reach of U.S. net, and our cyber attack is better. Chinese threat is all high to Ross 9. Beijing is developing cyber warfare techniques to exaggerate assessment capability. By the way, China emerging vulnerability of such attack to reciprocal effective Washington warfare capability, reaching the ability to wage high technological warfare capability of Chinese technology, weapon of defense, and to trade and threat of U.S. security. This is part of the meta-uniqueness claim against their advantage.
or cyber tech is something that they're trying to attack.
6:57 or 37.
Y'all didn't read the Conway card, did you?
Yeah, I don't think so.
I think I cut that Conway.
Yeah, we didn't. I didn't read that card.
We had 4 people. Do y'all know how much per we had left? I think it's 415. I don't know if you wrote it down.
Yeah, what's
Just wanted to make sure I wrote it down.
this?